The front door slammed with a sound that split our house in half. I watched from the stairs as my father dragged his suitcase toward the driveway, my mother's voice breaking as she pleaded behind him. "Please, Marcus, not in front of her. At least wait until." He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her tears or the 12 years of marriage crumbling at his feet. A woman's voice called from outside, bright and impatient. "Marcus, we're going to be late." His new wife. The replacement. I ran down the stairs, my feet pounding against hardwood, and grabbed his arm with both hands. "Daddy, wait! You said we'd go to the beach tomorrow. You promised we'd look for shells and build a castle with towers." He shook me off, the motion rough and dismissive, like I was a stranger bothering him on the street. His eyes were cold when they finally met mine, absent of the warmth I'd known my whole life. "You'll understand when you're older, Alara." Those 7 words. 7 words that destroyed everything I thought I knew about being loved. I stood in the doorway watching his car pull away, taillights disappearing into the evening, the sound echoing in my chest like a funeral bell marking the death of my childhood. My name is Alara Thorne, and that was the day my father decided I was disposable. I was 12 years old, watching my mother collapse onto the living room floor, her sobs filling the sudden silence he'd left behind. The house felt empty in ways it never had before, like his departure had sucked the warmth from every room. In the weeks that followed, I wrote him letters. Hopeful ones at first, filled with updates about school and questions about when he'd visit. Then desperate ones, begging him to come back, promising I'd be better, quieter, less trouble. I addressed each envelope carefully, double-checking the address to his new apartment that my mother had given me with trembling hands. Every single letter came back stamped "Return to Sender" in angry red ink. I hid them in a shoebox under my bed, a collection of rejected attempts to reach a man who'd already erased me from his life. My mother worked double shifts at the diner, coming home exhausted to face bills she couldn't pay on her own. I'd find her crying over the kitchen table at midnight, calculator in hand, trying to make numbers work that would never add up. I learned to be quiet, to need less, to pretend everything was fine at school while our world fell apart at home. 4 months after he left, my best friend Kayla showed me something during lunch period. She pulled a newspaper from her backpack, her face apologetic and uncertain. "Alara, I'm sorry, but I thought you should know." The society page featured a wedding photo. My father stood in an expensive suit, his arm around a woman with perfect hair and a smile that looked practiced. Beside them stood a girl about my age, wearing a dress that probably cost more than our monthly rent. The caption read, "Prominent attorney Marcus Thorne celebrates family milestone with wife Helena and daughter Autumn." Family milestone, like we'd never existed, like my mother and I had been rough drafts he discarded on his way to the final version of his life. My hands shook as I stared at the photo, at his smile that I'd once thought belonged to me. The girl, Autumn, looked nothing like me, blonde where I was dark-haired, polished where I was rough around the edges from second-hand clothes and worry. I ripped the newspaper in half, right through his face, and threw it in the trash. Kayla squeezed my shoulder but said nothing. What was there to say? My father had found a better family, and I was yesterday's discarded model. For my 13th birthday, I did something pathetic and hopeful that still makes my chest ache to remember. I mailed one final letter. Not begging this time, just a simple invitation written on the back of a homemade birthday card. "Dear Dad, I'm turning 13 on Saturday. Mom and I are having cake at 3 p.m. I hope you can come. Love, Alara." I waited by the window all afternoon in the dress my mother had bought me from the thrift store, the cake we'd baked together sitting on our small kitchen table. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, my favorite. Every car that passed made my heart jump. Every noise outside sent me running to look. 3 o'clock came and went, then 4, then 5. At 6, my mother gently suggested we cut the cake, her eyes red from watching me wait for someone who was never coming. I went to my room instead. Later that night, I threw the entire untouched cake into the trash, the candles still standing like tiny monuments to disappointment. As I walked back to my room, I whispered to the empty hallway, "You won't get to see me grow up. You won't get to know who I become." It was both a promise and a threat, though I didn't fully understand which yet. School became its own kind of torture. Word spread fast in our small town that Marcus Thorne had left his family for a wealthier woman with a ready-made replacement daughter. Kids whispered in hallways, their voices carrying just loud enough for me to hear. "Your dad's with his new daughter now. I heard she's prettier than you. My mom says your dad upgraded, that his new family has actual money. The cruelty of children reflecting their parents' gossip cut deeper than any adult judgment. I'd clench my fists under my desk during class, refusing to give them the satisfaction of tears. One afternoon, a group of girls cornered me by the lockers, led by Brittany, whose father worked at my dad's law firm. My dad says your dad is way happier now, that he finally has the life he deserves with people who aren't, like, poor and embarrassing. Something snapped inside me, not into tears or shouting, but into cold, hard determination. I looked Brittany straight in the eye and said quietly, "One day my name will mean something, and yours won't." She laughed, but I meant every word. That was the moment I decided. I'd make my name so powerful, so undeniable, that my father would spend the rest of his life regretting he'd ever let me go. Years passed. I threw myself into academics with the desperation of someone trying to prove their existence mattered. While other kids dated and went to parties, I studied until my eyes burned and my hands cramped from taking notes. My mother watched with worry and pride mixed together. "You're allowed to have a childhood, sweetheart." But I didn't want one. Childhood was where my father had abandoned me. I wanted to become someone he couldn't ignore. When I was 16, I won my district's Academic Excellence Award. The ceremony was held in the school auditorium, local officials and parents filling the seats. As I walked across the stage to accept my medal, I scanned the audience for his face. Some stupid, hopeful part of me thought maybe this would bring him back. He wasn't there. But afterwards, I noticed a plaque in the lobby listing education fund donors. Marcus Thorne and Associates was engraved near the top in letters that seemed to mock me. Even when I excelled, even when I achieved something worth celebrating, he couldn't be my father. He could only be the benefactor, supporting education in general while ignoring his own daughter's success specifically. I went home and cried for the last time about him. After that, my tears turned to fuel. When I was 17, my mother collapsed at work. The diner manager called me during school, his voice urgent and scared. "Your mom's in the hospital. You need to come now." I ran the 6 blocks to County General, my backpack bouncing against my spine, fear making my legs move faster than they ever had. I found her in the emergency room, looking small and gray against white sheets. The doctor spoke to me like I was an adult, which I'd been forced to become years ago. "Severe exhaustion and stress-induced hypertension. She's been working too hard for too long." I sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. When her eyes finally opened and focused on me, I squeezed her fingers gently. "You have me, Mom. I'll take care of you now. I promise." She smiled weakly, tears sliding down her temples. "You always did, baby. You always did." That night, I applied for every scholarship and grant I could find. I added weekend shifts at the grocery store to my after-school job. I would take care of us both. My father had chosen to abandon his responsibilities. I chose to embrace mine. The difference between us was becoming clear. College acceptance letters arrived the spring of my senior year. Full rides to state schools, partial scholarships to better universities, and one letter that made my hands shake: acceptance to a prestigious university with a scholarship sponsored by my father's law firm. The money would cover everything. Tuition, room, board, books. 4 years of education without the crushing debt that terrified most students. I could give my mother a break from working herself to death. We could breathe for the first time in years. I threw the letter away. My mother found it in the trash that night and confronted me, confusion and frustration in her voice. "Alara, this is a full scholarship. Why would you refuse this? It's his money, Mom. I'd rather crawl on broken glass than owe him a single dime." "Baby, he left us, but you don't have to punish yourself to punish him." But she didn't understand. Taking his money would mean admitting I needed him. Would mean his abandonment had broken me enough to accept his guilt offerings. I chose a different university and worked 3 jobs to pay for it. Mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons in the campus library, nights waiting tables at a restaurant near school. I was exhausted constantly, but at least my success would be entirely mine. I graduated with honors 4 years later, my mother clapping proudly from the audience in a section reserved for families. She'd taken the day off work, something she rarely did, wearing her best dress and holding flowers she'd bought from the grocery store. I looked for him in the crowd. I couldn't help it. Some pathetic corner of my heart still hoped he'd show up, that my graduation would be important enough to merit his attention. He didn't come. But 2 days later, a card arrived in the mail. Store-bought generic. Congratulations on your graduation. I'm glad you found your path. Best wishes for your future. No love, Dad. No apology for missing the ceremony or the previous 6 years. No acknowledgement of everything I'd overcome without him. Just distance disguised as civility, obligation masquerading as care. I showed it to my mother, who read it with pressed lips. Are you okay? She asked gently. I'm perfect, I lied. He's exactly who I thought he was. I put the card in the box with my returned letters, a collection of evidence documenting his consistent absence. Then I focused on my next goal, medical school. If he wanted distance, I'd put oceans of achievement between us. My first medical school rejection arrived on a Tuesday, the thin envelope telling me everything before I even opened it. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the letter crumpled in my fist, and felt the weight of everything I'd been carrying finally crush me. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of grinding exhaustion, all of it leading to a single word. No. My mother found me there hours later when I didn't answer my phone. She sat beside me without speaking, just held me while I cried angry, frustrated tears. I'm not good enough, I whispered. I'll never be good enough to make him sorry. She grabbed my face gently, forcing me to meet her eyes. Listen to me, Alara. He walked away, but you never stop walking forward. Do you hear me? You keep moving forward. Those words became my mantra. I reapplied to medical schools, improved my scores, volunteered at free clinics until I could barely stand. I refused to let one rejection define me the way my father's abandonment had threatened to. If he could walk away and build a new life, I could rebuild from rejection and create something better. The difference was, I'd do it with integrity he'd never possessed. Late one night during my second application cycle, someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it to find a man in an expensive suit, his face professionally neutral. Alara Thorne? Yes. I'm Timothy Cross, assistant to Marcus Thorne. He asked me to reach out regarding your medical school applications. My stomach dropped. How does he know about my applications? He keeps track of your achievements. When he learned you were applying again, he wanted to offer financial assistance. Medical school is expensive and— Stop. I cut him off, fury making my voice sharp. You go back and tell my father I don't need his money, I don't need his guilt, I don't need anything from him except to be left alone. Timothy shifted uncomfortably. Miss Thorne, he genuinely wants to help. If he genuinely wanted to help, he would have stayed. He would have been my father instead of a stranger who sends birthday cards sometimes. Tell him I'll succeed without him. I've been doing it for years. I closed the door in his face, my hands shaking with rage. How dare he try to buy his way into my success now, after years of silence? His money couldn't purchase redemption. I'd make sure of that. 4 months later, the acceptance letter arrived. Thick envelope, official seal, words that blurred through my tears of relief and triumph. I'd been accepted to a top medical program, on my own merit, with scholarships I'd earned myself. I drove straight to the cemetery, the letter clutched in my hand. My mother had passed 6 months earlier, her heart finally giving out after years of stress and overwork. I knelt beside her headstone, the grass damp against my knees, and placed the letter on the granite. We did it, Mom, you and me. We actually did it. The wind rustled the trees overhead, and for a moment I let myself believe she could hear me. That somewhere, she knew I'd kept walking forward just like she'd told me to. I stayed until sunset, telling her about everything. The program, my plans, the future I was building stone by stone. A future my father would never be part of, except as the cautionary tale I'd tell my own children someday about what it means to choose yourself over family. When I finally left, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but determined. Medical school would be brutal, but I'd already survived worse. I'd survived abandonment. Everything else was just details. Medical school consumed me completely. The workload was crushing, the competition fierce, the pressure constant and relentless. I thrived in it. During my 3rd year, I assisted in my first major surgery. The attending surgeon, a demanding woman named Dr. Reeves, let me close while she supervised. My hands were steady despite my racing heart, my sutures precise despite the exhaustion that made my whole body ache. You've got steady hands, kid, Dr. Reeves said afterwards in the locker room. And more importantly, you've got steady nerves. That's rare. I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. Thank you, doctor. You remind me of myself at your age, hungry, determined, running from something while chasing something else. She studied me carefully. Whatever you're running from, make sure you're running towards something better. I nodded, thinking about my father's face as he'd shaken me off that last day. I promise I am. Walking through the hospital that night, I realized something profound. These people, my fellow residents and attendings, the nurses and techs I worked alongside, they were becoming the family I'd built through purpose. Not blood family who could abandon you, but chosen family who stayed because they wanted to. One afternoon, taking a shortcut through the main hospital atrium, I froze mid-step. A donor recognition wall stretched across the space, brass plaques gleaming under careful lighting. I scanned the names automatically, the way you do when walking past any list. Then I saw it. Marcus Thorne and Associates Benefactor, Cardiac Care Wing. Large letters, prominent placement. He'd funded an entire wing of the hospital where I now worked. Even here, in the place I'd fought so hard to reach, his shadow stretched ahead of me. Other residents passed by, chatting about their cases, oblivious to my crisis. I stood there staring at his name, feeling 12 years old again, watching him drive away, reading his name in the newspaper beside his replacement family, finding it on scholarship lists I refused. Even here, I muttered to the empty hallway. Even here, he buys his legacy instead of earning it. I walked past that wall every day for the next 2 years. Each time, I refused to look at his plaque. It became a test of my discipline, my ability to control my reaction to his continued presence in spaces he didn't deserve to occupy. He could buy buildings, but he couldn't buy my forgiveness or my respect. Those I'd never sell. Social media was a mistake. I'd avoided it through most of medical school, too busy to care about what old classmates were doing. But one sleepless night during my cardiothoracic surgery fellowship, I scrolled through feeds mindlessly. That's when I saw her, Autumn, my father's replacement daughter. She'd graduated from medical school too, her photos showing a ceremony at a prestigious university I'd been rejected from years ago. The caption, written by my father, made my chest tight. "So incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. Watching you become a doctor has been one of the greatest joys of my life. Love, Dad." I read it 3 times, each word a small knife. He could be proud of her, could call her sweetheart, could show up to her graduation and post about the joy of watching her succeed. But when I'd walked across that stage, he'd sent a generic card with no love and no presence. I shut my phone off and threw it across the room. It took me an hour to calm down, to remind myself that his inability to love me wasn't a reflection of my worth. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things. That night, I dreamed of that last day, of grabbing his arm, of him shaking me off. I woke up with tears on my face and fury in my heart. Years blurred together in the demanding rhythm of surgical training. Fellowship, chief resident, finally, board certification as a cardiothoracic surgeon. I was 32 years old, standing in my apartment holding the certificate that represented 15 years of relentless work. My mentor, Dr. Reeves, had insisted on taking me to dinner to celebrate. Over expensive wine I'd learned to appreciate, she raised her glass. "You've earned everything they said you couldn't have. Every person who doubted you, every obstacle they put in your path, you conquered all of it." I touched my glass to hers. "Thank you for believing in me." "I didn't believe in you at first," she admitted with characteristic honesty. "You were too angry, too driven by something other than passion for medicine. But you channeled that anger into excellence. That's rare." I framed my certification that night beside a photo of my mother, the only family I acknowledged. She smiled from the frame, young and hopeful from before my father destroyed her. "We did it," I whispered to her image. "Everything you sacrificed, everything you worked for, it wasn't wasted." My apartment was modest despite my new salary. I'd learned to live without luxury, without excess. Success for me wasn't measured in possessions, but in achievement my father could never diminish or claim credit for. The morning news alert appeared on my phone during rounds. "Prominent attorney hospitalized after sudden cardiac event. Marcus Thorne, senior partner at Thorne and Associates, is in stable condition following emergency hospitalization." I stared at the notification, my heart pounding irregularly. The photo showed him on a gurney being loaded into an ambulance, looking old and vulnerable in ways I'd never seen. He was 63 now. The years had turned his dark hair gray, added lines to his face that weren't there in my memories. The hospital listed in the article was mine. I stood in the corridor outside a patient's room, other residents flowing around me, and felt time collapse. 20 years disappeared, and I was 12 again, watching him leave. 32 and accomplished, reading about his medical crisis. Both versions of myself existing simultaneously, connected by the thread of his abandonment and my survival. My hands shook as I pocketed my phone. Dr. Reeves appeared beside me. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," I lied. "Long shift." But it wasn't tiredness. It was the universe placing a decision in front of me I'd never imagined having to make. My father, the man who'd abandoned me, was about to enter my hospital, and I had no idea what that meant. The chief of surgery called an emergency pre-op briefing that afternoon. I sat in the conference room with other attending surgeons, reviewing cases for the upcoming schedule. When Dr. Harrison reached the last file, he paused. "This one's complicated. 53-year-old male, significant blockage in 3 major arteries. We're looking at a triple bypass, high risk given his age and stress levels." He passed around the file. I took it mechanically, scanning the medical history, the test results, the carefully documented progression of his condition. Everything was routine until I reached the patient information page. Name, Marcus Alexander Thorne. Age, 63. Emergency contact, Helena Thorne, wife. My vision tunneled. The room continued around me, people discussing surgical approaches and recovery protocols, but I heard nothing over the rushing in my ears. "Dr. Thorne?" I looked up. Dr. Harrison was watching me with concern. "You're assigned to this case as lead surgeon. Is there a problem?" 20 years of training, of discipline, of building expertise from nothing, it all led to this moment. My father's life in my hands. Fate hadn't just walked into my hospital. It had been scheduled, assigned, placed directly in my path like a test I'd never studied for. "No problem," I heard myself say. "I'll review the file thoroughly and prep for surgery." Somehow, I made it through the rest of the meeting, but inside, I was falling apart. Surgery day arrived with cruel brightness. I stood in the scrub room, methodically washing my hands while my mind raced. Through the window, I could see the operating room being prepared. The table where my father would lie unconscious and vulnerable. The machines that would keep him alive while I literally held his heart. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The skilled surgeon in scrubs, mask hanging around her neck, hair tucked into a surgical cap. Did I look like him? Had I inherited his eyes or his stubborn jaw? I'd spent so long trying not to see him in myself that I'd stopped looking. "Dr. Thorne, ready?" The circulating nurse poked her head in. I nodded, drying my hands carefully. Entered the OR with the same focused calm I brought to every surgery. My team was already positioned, everyone knowing their role, trusting my expertise. Then they wheeled him in. My father, unconscious from pre-op sedation, looking smaller and older than the man who'd driven away 20 years ago. Life and age had diminished him, stripped away the power he'd wielded so carelessly. "Scalpel," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. The nurse placed it in my palm. I looked down at his exposed chest, at the sterile drapes framing the site where I'd cut. His life was literally in my hands. One small choice, one moment of distraction or intention, could change everything. As I made the first incision, memories flooded my mind with violent clarity. His laughter as he drove away, the sound reaching me through the open car window. My mother's sobs echoing through our empty house. The birthday cake sitting untouched on our kitchen table. His name engraved on plaques and donor walls while my letters came back returned to sender. Every motion of my hands became a reclaiming of control. He'd taken my childhood, my security, my father. But he couldn't take my skill or my ethics or my choice to be nothing like him. The surgery progressed with mechanical precision. I called for instruments, directed my team, monitored vitals, all while my mind existed in 2 places at once. Present, performing complex cardiac procedures with practiced expertise. And past, watching my 12-year-old self stand in the driveway, abandoned. "Dr. Thorne," his pressures dropping slightly. The anesthesiologist's voice cut through my thoughts. I refocused immediately, adjusting my approach, stabilizing the graft I was placing. This was just another heart, just another patient. Except it wasn't, and we both knew it. My hands moved with steady confidence born from thousands of hours of practice. Years of becoming excellent at the thing he'd never witnessed or supported. I was saving the life of a man who'd treated mine as disposable. The irony wasn't lost on me. A monitor beeped irregularly, the sound sharp in the focused quiet. The scrub nurse glanced up, concern in her eyes above her mask. "Doctor!" I paused, my hands inside my father's chest cavity, literally holding his beating heart. The rhythm was unstable, responding poorly to the bypass. One small adjustment could fix it, or one deliberate mistake could end everything right here. For a split second, 20 years of pain crystallized into a single moment of absolute power. I could let him go, could allow the complications that sometimes happen in surgery to take their natural course. Who would question it? These procedures were high risk. Sometimes patients didn't make it despite our best efforts. Justice served on an operating table, poetic and final. His abandonment repaid with equal indifference. But then I heard my mother's voice, clear as if she were standing beside me. "He walked away, but you never stop walking forward." Walking forward meant being better than him, meant choosing ethics over vengeance, meant saving lives regardless of whether they deserved saving. "Stabilize the rhythm," I ordered, my voice firm. "Increase the dosage and adjust the flow. Continue bypass protocol." My hands moved with renewed precision, correcting the instability, ensuring his survival, because I was nothing like him, and that was the greatest victory of all. The surgery was a complete success. 7 hours of meticulous work resulted in 3 clean bypasses, stable vitals, and an excellent prognosis. I closed him up with the same care I gave every patient, my sutures neat and purposeful. In recovery, I removed my surgical gear and stood outside his room, watching through the window. He lay unconscious, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped reassuring rhythms. Nurses moved around him efficiently, checking readings, adjusting medication. He looked peaceful, unaware that his life had just been saved by the daughter he'd discarded. Hours later, after I'd completed my rounds and updated his family, his wife Helena and Autumn both tearful with relief, I returned to his room. He was awake, eyes foggy with pain medication but aware. When he saw me approaching, confusion crossed his face, then recognition. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You!" he whispered, his voice cracking around the word. I stood at the foot of his bed, my white coat pristine, my identification badge clearly stating Dr. Alara Thorne, cardiothoracic surgery. "Yes," I replied calmly. "Me." Tears pooled in his eyes, spilling over to track down his weathered cheeks. "Alara, I didn't know. I had no idea you were my surgeon. No, I suppose you wouldn't. You stopped keeping track of me 20 years ago." He tried to sit up but winced, the fresh incision protesting movement. I didn't know how to come back. After so much time, I thought it was too late. I studied him dispassionately, the way I'd study any patient's chart. "You're right. It was too late the moment you shook me off your arm and drove away. I was a coward. I chose the easier path instead of being my father. Yes." I crossed my arms. "You built a new family and forgot you already had a daughter, one who needed you. Who waited for you." He was fully crying now, the medication making him emotional and unguarded. "I'm sorry. God, Alara, I'm so sorry. I know you are now when you're vulnerable and scared and facing your own mortality." I stepped closer to the bed. "But where was your sorry when Mom died working herself to death? Where was it during my graduation or my acceptance to medical school? I didn't deserve you then. I don't deserve you now." He reached toward me with a shaking hand. "But you saved me." Why? I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd haunted my every achievement and every sleepless night. "That's what good people do," I said quietly. "Even when no one saved them, even when they deserved to be abandoned the way they abandoned others." I turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard him whisper, "Thank you." I didn't respond. Some things didn't deserve acknowledgement. 6 weeks later, the hospital hosted its annual recognition dinner. The grand ballroom was filled with colleagues, donors, and hospital administration. Awards were presented for excellence in various departments, speeches made about innovation and dedication. When they called my name for excellence in surgical performance, I walked to the stage feeling eyes follow me. I'd never enjoyed public speaking, but I'd learned to tolerate it. At the podium, I looked out at the crowd. My father sat near the back, his wife beside him. He'd recovered well from surgery, following every post-op instruction with the diligence of someone who'd been given a second chance at life. Our eyes met briefly before I began. "Thank you for this honor. I'd like to dedicate it to everyone who's ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. To those who were abandoned and left to build themselves from broken pieces. I paused, my voice strengthening. To those who left us, thank you. You taught us who we never want to become. You showed us that strength isn't measured by who stays, but by who survives being left behind. The camera panned across the audience. I saw my father, eyes downcast, hands clasped in his lap. Helena whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. Good. Let him sit with it. Let him understand what he'd lost and who I'd become without him. After the ceremony, I stood outside the hospital entrance, the city lights reflecting off glass buildings in the distance. I'd changed out of my formal dress back into my white coat, more comfortable in my professional identity than any fancy clothes. Ilara! His voice behind me. I'd known he'd follow. I turned slowly. My father stood there, smaller somehow than he'd seemed in my memories. He held something carefully, a photograph. I've carried this for 20 years. The last picture of us together before I ruined everything. He extended it toward me. The photo showed us at the beach, me probably 7 years old, sitting on his shoulders while he grinned at the camera. Both of us happy before everything broke. Can we start again? He asked quietly, his voice fragile with hope. Can I try to be your father now? I took the photograph, studying it. Two strangers I barely recognized, frozen in a moment of happiness that hadn't lasted. I looked at him, this man who'd given me life and then walked away from it, who taught me resilience through abandonment and strength through rejection. I already did start again, I said calmly, handing the photo back. 20 years ago, when you left me standing in that driveway, I built an entire life without you. A good life. A meaningful life. His face crumpled. So there's no forgiveness, no chance for us. I forgave you during your surgery. When I chose to save you instead of letting the complications take their course. I adjusted my coat, preparing to leave. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean letting you back into a life you chose to leave. I walked toward my car, my footsteps echoing in the quiet parking structure. Behind me, I heard him call my name one last time, but I didn't turn around. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, the mantra that had carried me through 2 decades of building myself from ruins. He walked away, but you never stop walking forward. I got in my car and drove into the city lights, toward whatever came next. Behind me, my father stood alone in the darkness, holding a photograph of a relationship that existed only in the past. Ahead of me stretched a future I'd earned entirely on my own. The choice between them was easy. I'd made it 20 years ago, and I'd make it again tonight. Some people chose to leave. I chose to keep walking forward without them.